Can you build muscle and lose fat at the same time? Old school bros will tell you that you need a big surplus to build muscle, but new age lifters claim bulking's unnecessary and anyone can do both at once. So who's right? Well, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Yes, if you want to build the most muscle possible, you're probably going to need dedicated building phases. But even with that, I do think most people in the gym can recomp. So today I'm breaking down who can build muscle and lose fat at the same time, and exactly what you need to do if that's your goal. So first let's talk about a more traditional bulk. The old school thought process is you need to eat in a large surplus to fuel the muscle building, but honestly, science doesn't really seem to agree with that. For instance, there was one study that took people and overfed them by 600 calories, and when they compared them to people eating in a smaller surplus, they didn't gain significantly more muscle. Yes, there was a very small difference, but not statistically significant, but they did gain significantly more fat. So the problem with a more traditional bulking style where you go into a larger surplus is even if you do gain a little bit more muscle, the amount of fat that you're going to put on during that process is going to make it take so much longer to go through the cut in the future. And if your goal is to build as much muscle as possible, you don't need more than about a 1 to 200 calorie surplus to make sure you're fueling that muscle building, but not adding more fat than is necessary. Now, while this video is about body recomposition, where you're trying to build muscle and lose fat at the same time, I do think the majority of people would be much better served if they went through specific building phases, not only because in the long run, this is how you're going to make big changes. For instance, when you see me after I've gotten really shredded, this is after going through several cycles of building and cutting and taking plenty of time, year, 2 years at a time, accumulating the muscle and then cutting back down. So again, if you want to build as much muscle as possible, you need these building phases, and body recomp isn't going to get you where you want to be. But that doesn't mean it can't be done, and it's not right for some people. Maybe it's going to be right for you, because I'm not saying you can't build muscle at maintenance or even in a deficit in some scenarios. So with that, if your goal is recomp, there's basically 5 main scenarios where it's much more likely you're going to be able to build muscle and lose fat at the same time. And understand, if you're talking about recomp typically means because you are adding weight from muscle and reducing weight from fat, your body composition improves even though weight is roughly the same. But in some scenarios, like the first one I'm going to cover, you absolutely can lose plenty of weight but also still build muscle. And that first scenario is if you're a beginner to training, especially if you're obese, because you have more body fat, which is basically your body's energy reserves. Calories can easily be pulled from fat to fuel the muscle building process. The second scenario is maybe you trained before, but now you've had a long layoff. You've lost a bunch of muscle because of this. When you return to training again, muscle memory is very real. Your muscles basically accumulate this myonuclei, and even though you lose muscle tissue, this nuclei stays with you, which allows the muscle building process to happen much faster than it did the first time, so you can rebuild in a hurry. In fact, many years ago, I had to take 12 weeks off of training, couldn't touch a weight at all, and you can see even though I roughly maintained my weight, the body composition was very different. It only took about 6 weeks to get back to where I was after 12 weeks of being off. The third scenario, the easiest one, is if you go on steroids. And no, I'm not suggesting you should do this. I mean, it's your body. Everyone has to make their own decisions. For me, I'm a lifetime natural. I have no desire for it. I think not only the potential side effects from it, physiologically speaking, aren't worth it, but also just psychologically, I wouldn't feel good about what I've accomplished knowing the steroids basically did all the work for me. And don't believe anybody who says, well, you still have to work hard even if you take steroids. That could not be further from the truth. There was actually a study where they compared people who lifted naturally versus people who lifted with steroids versus people who didn't even lift weights at all and took steroids. And the group that took steroids and didn't even lift weights at all gained more muscle than the people who lifted naturally. So no, you don't have to work hard if you're taking steroids. Obviously, if you want the best results, you need both, but it just makes a massive difference. The fourth scenario where it's more possible is if you introduce a better training stimulus. So maybe you've been training, but you haven't really been pushing yourself very hard. You're not getting close to failure, leaving way too much in the tank. Or maybe you were on some suboptimal training programming and now you get onto a more optimal training program. A lot of people just go into the gym and just do a bunch of random stuff and there's really no rhyme or reason to what they're doing. And sure, when you're a complete true beginner, that's going to work. But over time, you need something more specific that's creating progressive overload, and you want to give your body a stimulus to let it adapt. Adaptation is not a bad thing. It's what causes muscle growth. So you give the body a stimulus, you give it time to adapt to that stimulus, then you recover from it. This is where deloads come in, and then you give it a new stimulus. And then the fifth main reason, there's actually a couple more that are a little bit more nuanced. I'll cover them at the end of the video. But the fifth main one is if you go from a low protein diet to a high protein diet, you can absolutely start building muscle and losing fat simultaneously. Not just because protein is what actually builds muscle, but it not only helps with the building of muscle, but also thanks to the high thermic effect of food, it helps with fat loss as well. So with that, if you want to build muscle and lose fat at the same time, here's what you should do. Make sure you're training 4 to 5 days per week, at least as an experienced lifter. If you're completely new to training, you can get away with 3 and still build plenty of muscle, but the longer you do it, you're gonna need more training to get the necessary volume to create these results. I also recommend training each muscle group twice per week. Research has shown when you train 2 or 3 times per week over just one time time per week, when you equate total volume, the multiple days per week tends to produce better results, probably because when you train a muscle group, you increase muscle protein synthesis in that muscle for a couple days afterwards. And if you're only doing it once per week, you're only getting that increase once per week instead of multiple times per week. And then again, make sure you're pushing close to failure and challenging yourself. The second thing is, if you're looking for recomp, you need to eat around your maintenance calories. Now you can shift your goals slightly. Like if your goals are a little bit more towards the fat loss side, you can eat in a smaller surplus, or if your goal is to build more muscle, you can eat in a very small surplus. But overall, you're gonna hang around maintenance. If you're not sure what that is, honestly, one of the best things you can do if you haven't been tracking is just take the next week, kind of eat roughly the same, see what it looks like. If you've been maintaining your weight, you know this is roughly your maintenance calories. And then it's just about being consistent, monitoring and adjusting, and then aiming to eat around 1 gram per pound of your body weight when it comes to protein. And if you do these things consistently, over time, your body will start shifting. Now, with all that being said, there's actually 3 things I personally did, even as an experienced lifter. I'd been lifting for 15 years at the time, that allowed me to take 2 inches off my waist with my weight only changing by 1 pound. So to find out what I did, then make sure you check out this video here to find out some other strategies to help you recomp. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you in that other video.